أصبحت المدارس في وقتنا الحاضر مهيئة للمجتمع المعرفة، وذلك من خلال البرامج الأكاديمية المتخصصة والتوجيه المهني وتوفير الموارد والتكنولوجيا، وذلك ساعد في تطوير المهارات لدى الطلبة مثل مهارات التواصل والقيادة والعديد من المهارات العليا التي تهيئ الطالب للحياة العملية. إضافة إلى ذلك التعليم التطبيقي أو العملي، على سبيل المثال المشاريع العلمية الجماعية والتي تتطلب من الطلاب البحث والتخطيط والتنفيذ والتقييم. أضف إلى ذلك الرحلات والزيارات الميدانية للمتاحف والمحميات الطبيعية والمصانع وورش العمل والشراكات المجتمعية.
في 2018 كان عندنا تجربة مختلفة نوعاً ما. كنا نحاول أن نعلم الأطفال عن مخاطر الإنترنت بطريقة مختلفة ومبتكرة عن طريق اللعب، وكان جزء من البرنامج أن يكون في البرمجة الإلكترونية، ومجموعة من الأطفال كان لهم دور أنهم يبرمجون لعبة إلكترونية فيديو جيم من عمر 7 سنوات إلى 12 سنة. وكانت المفاجأة أن كيف الأطفال صمموا اللعبة كاملة وبرمجوها، وكان هذا النجاح المبهر دافع أن نستمر بطريقة مبتكرة، أن نعلم الأطفال بطريقة مختلفة هم يستمتعون فيها.
يمكن اعتبار المتحف بمثابة مدرسة للعين والأنظار، وهذا شيء مهم في اللوفر أبو ظبي. ولتحفيز الأطفال وتشجيع مشاركتهم وانخراطهم في التجربة، تعتمد المحطات التفاعلية بشكل أساسي على تقنيات التلعيب أو ما يعرف بجيميفيكيشن، حيث صممت كل التفاعلات على شكل ألعاب أو تحديات بصرية تحفز الأطفال إلى التمعن بدقة في الأعمال الفنية المعروضة واكتشافها عن قرب، للعثور على أجوبة تمكنهم من حل الألغاز والألعاب المقترحة والاستمرار في اللعبة.
You know, these young minds are genuine problem solvers. They will think of solutions that we haven't even considered. Every child has a gift. Every child has a talent. Every child has something really special to them. They've also got these areas of vulnerability. They've also got these areas of opportunity that schools should enhance and support them with. And that's where the relationship between us and parents is really important, because when we look at those opportunities and we work together, we fill those gaps and make them stronger. What we've got to give our children is a platform to use their knowledge to create change.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سيدي سمو الشيخ حامد بن زايد آل نهيان، سمو الشيوخ، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، الضيوف الكرام، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اسمحوا لي بالبداية بالتعريف عن نفسي. أختكم مريم عمران الحلامي، مستشار في دائرة التعليم والمعرفة بأبو ظبي، والقائم على شؤون التعليم المبكر في الدائرة. طالبة دكتوراه في جامعة باث البريطانية، أعمل على بحث معني بفهم الرحلة التعليمية وتحدياتها للطلاب ذوي الدخل المحدود. حاصلة على ماجستير في فلسفة وسياسة التعليم، وماجستير في القيادة التربوية من جامعة كلية لندن في المملكة البريطانية. يشرفني اليوم أن أتولى مهمة إدارة هذا الحوار الذي يتمحور حول إعادة التصور في التعليم في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة، وهي المرحلة الأكثر أهمية في تكوين الطفل. ستتناول المحاضرة اليوم مناقشة أهمية التعلم من خلال اللعب والتعلم التطبيقي لإثراء التجربة التعليمية مما يلائم احتياجات الطفل واهتماماته في هذه المرحلة. نستضيف اليوم الخبير العالمي في مجال الطفولة المبكرة بروفيسور جراوس. يركز البروفيسور في عمله على دور اللعب في جميع المراحل التعليمية منذ الولادة وحتى سن 99 سنة، والنظر إلى كيفية جعل الأنظمة التعليمية أكثر إبداعاً لتواكب اهتمامات وتطلعات المتعلمين. ألفت عنايتكم الكريمة إلى أن المحاضرة ستكون باللغة الإنجليزية وبإمكانكم استخدام السماعات لمتابعة الترجمة الفورية. واسمحوا لي الآن بأن أتحدث باللغة الإنجليزية. Your Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it brings me great honor to introduce a pioneer in the field of early education, Professor Geraus, OBE, who brings his deep knowledge in early childhood to put play at the center of learning. The lecture today will focus on the important role that play and experience have in transforming the learning experience of learners. Professor Geraus is the first Global Director of Education at Kidzania and the founding CEO of the Children's University. And now we welcome Professor Geraus to start the lecture.
Thank you so much. Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, firstly, it's an absolute privilege to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation. Secondly, a slight apology. I carry with me a good old-fashioned British cold, so if my voice sounds a little bit croaky, that's why. I've come to talk a little bit about children today, really, because I think when we talk about education and schooling, we very often talk about the system, the building, the test, the league table. I was talking to Andrea Schleicher the other day, the education director of OECD, who talks a lot about PISA league tables. But I'd like to think about children, and particularly the early years of childhood. And actually, maybe not just the early years of childhood, because one of the things that we do with our children is we put them in boxes, don't we? We put them in jars. They are little, and then they're not so little, and then they're a little bit older, and then they go to university. And we pass the parcel a little bit. So I'd like to think 0 to 99, but let's have a little focus on the 0 and the first few years, because when you built that beautiful mosque next door, one of the reasons it's beautiful is because the foundations were strong. And one of the reasons trees grow tall is because the roots have a chance to set. So when we talk about the growing and the education of children, we need to think about the foundations and how we can make them as good as possible. So firstly, this is me. I was a teacher, I became an advisor, an inspector, education director, and then kind of left the system and started working in learning outside the classroom, including in museums, not quite like the Louvre, but not far off. And that was how I was described once, and I love this. So this is on my office door, okay? And I think it's really important, our office doors, and one of the things I'd like you to think about when today is over is what's on your door. And one of the things we put on our door far too much is what we do and not who we are. And perhaps when it comes to children, we need to ask the question, who would you like to be? Rather than what would you like to do? Because I think the who question is about values and principles. Today there's a thread, and please, a thread of thoughts. And if anybody wants to talk more about the thread of thoughts afterwards, my contact details will be in there somewhere, or we can do it here. But that's the kind of thread. Where are we now? What about experience? How will we know whether it makes a difference? What about the mind and enlightenment? And of course, what about the role we all play as teachers? Because we are all teachers. Because at some point, somewhere in our lives, there will be at least one child who will look to us for answers, for help. And at that moment in time, we all become teachers.
Training fleas requires a glass jar with a lid. The fleas are placed inside the jar and the lid is then sealed. They are left undisturbed for 3 days. Then, when the jar is opened, the fleas will not jump out. In fact, the fleas will never jump higher than the level set by the lid. Their behaviour is now set for the rest of their lives. And when these fleas reproduce, their offspring will automatically follow their example.
Our young people will become and will only grow within the parameters that we set. Boys, girls, rich, poor, from different countries, different parts of society. And we need to think that through, because we talk about aspirations, and children can only be aspirant if we enable them to be aspirant. And we have behind us a sign of aspiration. We want our next generation to build, if you wish, bigger, better mosques, because that is what being aspirant is. But at the moment we live the definition of insanity, because as you know, when you go to school and you're not good at something, you're being asked to do the same thing over and over again, in the belief that it will make a difference. Perhaps we need to think differently. We need to stop passing the parcel. The children are not parcels that are passed from early years to primary school, to secondary school, to post-16, to universities. They are people that grow through and then into the world of work, and they become, as members of society and as members of economies, they become valuable if we allow them to grow rather than pass them from one to the next. Our children are more than a test score. We need to get to know our children much better than we do now. They are more than just the number. Ask our children about purpose. If children, if anybody for that matter, has passion and belief and purpose, they will perform, they will achieve. But we need to answer the question, why do you go to school? I travel all over the world. I've worked across 63 countries now, I think. And wherever I go, I will go to the children and say, why do you go to school? And the answer in about 80% of the cases is, because I have to. It's not that good an answer, really, is it? We'd like to think that more purpose lives behind that. And that's what we have to work at, because then they will become qualified, highly qualified learners. I want to play a little game with you now, just for a couple of minutes, in your minds. I'm going to give you words, and I'd like you to have every time two pictures in your head. One from 1920 and one from 2020. So let's start with car. So think car, 1920, car, 2020. Okay, got it? Aeroplane. 1920, I'm not flying in that one. 2020, yes please. Hospital operating theatre. 1920, 2020. Classroom. 1920, 2020. And yes, they're still sitting facing the front. They're still putting their hands up. They still turn up at certain times of the day. They still sit within four walls. And, oh yes, the blackboard has become white. So we've moved on in our society tremendously in all that time, but we educate our children in the same way. The education of the first industrial revolution. Mass production required mass schooling so that economically we would meet those needs. We are now in the age, the Industrial Revolution 5.0, we are in the age of personalization and entrepreneurship, but we haven't moved how we educate and school our children. And at some point, that is going to present us with a problem as societies and as economies. We need to think about who we are and who our children are. Now, I'm from the Netherlands, so that particularly resonates with me. If I give children in the Netherlands a piece of paper and a pencil, and I ask them to draw the horizon, I guarantee you that they will draw a straight line. because that almost signifies who they are. And within this globalization that we're involved in at the moment, we still need to recognize that we exist regionally, that we exist nationally, and that therefore our identities are shaped. And within that, we are shaped as individuals. We need to get to know who our children are. And then we need to measure what we value. My constant discussions with OECD that say, well, if the world is changing, can we stop measuring like we measured in the 1950s? And can we start to look at measuring confidence? Because I'll come to that in a minute. Because confident children, children who are confident enough to go to museums and art galleries, will become better, more confident learners. Bring me a confident learner and I'll give you the best of grades possible.
I'm one of the few female pilots. I've been to America, Spain, and I love every minute of it. Air traffic control has cleared us for takeoff. Okay, let's go. People, property, and postcodes. I call it the 3 Ps. Hello, Mrs. Smith. How can I help you? I have won lots of awards. When I was a school child, I was directing my school play. It's not a job, it's a calling. A Romeo. A Romeo. They see surgery as an art form. It's vital to keep a cool head. Scalpel. I'm a bit of a petrol head. I could have been a doctor, but I prefer cars. What's not to love?
For those of you who are not familiar with Kidzania, that's what it is. Cities built for children where they can experience the world of work, 4 to 14. And the reason I'm flagging that up is because I did globally research to get insights into how the children behave when they learn outside the classroom. And what we discovered was we were getting insights that we couldn't have got from anywhere else. So I urge anybody who is involved in the education of children to look beyond the grades so that we get to know the children. When they come to Kidzania all over the world, they get a bracelet because you're meant to be learning independently. When they go into any of the activities, they log into the activity so that we can trace where they are. But I asked of the researchers, can you tell me what on the first visit of a child, what their first choice is? And of course they did. And the sample stands now globally at around 560,000 across 8 countries. Once we had that information, the question became, well, who are the children who've made those choices? Are they 4? Are they 14? Are they boys? Are they girls? Are they black? Are they white? Are they rich? Are they poor? Which country are they from? And the key findings were stark beyond belief. So firstly, all stereotypes were set at the age of 4. So if you go into the aeroplane, the pilot activity was 95% boys. The cabin crew activity was 90% girls. And so it went, entirely with stereotype from the age of 4. Okay? Now you think that in our schooling system at the moment, we talk about careers education with children from about the age of 14. So we allow the stereotype to cement itself for 10 years, and then we think we can really still make a difference in the way they think. The second finding was that there was almost no change in that behavior between 4 and 14-year-olds. 14-year-olds were making choices in exactly the same way. The third finding was that girls globally, across all the countries, regardless of their background, girls choose activities below their age range. 9-year-old girls choose 7-year-olds activities. 9-year-old boys choose 9 or 10-year-old activities. So there is an issue in this about self-confidence and about how various societies, what the expectations of girls are. Now, if you're a teacher now and you know this, you go into a class anywhere in the world and you've got a class with 10 boys and 10 girls, you now need to begin to think differently how you enable them to learn in an equitable way. The next finding was that poor children make poor choices. The children from my wife's school, in one of the most disadvantaged areas of the United Kingdom, they've been to Kidzania, London more times than any other school because they got free tickets from me. No child ever chose the aeroplane, the operating theatre or the television studio as their first choice. They chose working in the supermarket, making beds in the hotel and being a courier. So children's choices and aspirations, back to the jars, are put in because of their circumstances. So if we want to affect change, we need to affect change through experiences beyond the school. And then finally, which was an interesting finding, was that all over the world, children make the same choices. There were very few differences between the countries. So from Mexico to Mumbai to Moscow, that behavior was the same. So here you have insights that you cannot get through tests, but that should influence the way we educate and school and think. It's incredibly important. I have two daughters, one of them is sitting here at the front. And that finding of girls choosing below the age range kind of made me wake up and you think, well, what can I do about that? And of course, I can think my thing, but collectively, we can think better and we can enhance our system. So children can only aspire to what they know exists. And part of our education provision has to be that we collectively open windows, open doors, and widen horizons, that we provide experiences as much as we can. That we realize that not all classrooms have four walls. Key factor. And that we realize that museums and art galleries, that our cultural heritage is part of our education. And that we should make it, I make the plea, mandatory for every child in every society to feel that the museum, the gallery, and the library is their home, educationally as well as culturally. We need to understand that friendships are better than normal ships. Partnership is the way to work, and I have a particular issue with the world of work. Because every year, Imogen will get her exam results in a couple of weeks' time, and everybody will go, oh, brilliant, brilliant. And then every year, the world of work will say, they may be brilliant, but they haven't got the skills we need them to have. Okay, so what are you doing about it? Come off the fence, roll up your sleeves, and help us in the light of partnership, make it happen. Because it will make our societies and our economies better. We need to think not just in terms of return on investment, which tends to be short term. We need to think in terms of return on involvement, which is a long-term commitment to our growth as societies. And we need to remember that the purpose of education is that the mind, once enlightened, cannot again become dark. You cannot unread what you've read. And that surely has to be the most powerful aspect of education and schooling. So some years ago, I invented this thing called Children's University, which was focused on 4 to 14-year-olds from disadvantaged backgrounds, initially in the United Kingdom. And what happened was we worked with museums and libraries and galleries and farms and zoos and sports clubs, you name it. And we encouraged children and their families to visit out of school hours. And we gave them a passport, and the children could collect the credits in the passport, the hours they had spent learning outside the classroom. And then they would graduate with their mums and dads at a proper grown-up university. When we conducted the research with Cambridge University, guess what happened? The children and their families who volunteered to learn outside the classroom, of course, they became better learners. They became more confident. And of course, they therefore did better at school. But we'd given them purpose. What I didn't know at the time was that that was going to go global. And my last act with the Children's University was flying to Australia to witness the first graduation in Adelaide. So what is it that we should think around, apart from the grades and attendance and schooling? Perhaps we need to have a collective understanding of what is it that we want every 11-year-old to have experienced. So this is my list, but it's mine. When I go into schools, I put it on a whiteboard and I leave the rubber there because I want the staff in schools to think what their list would look like, how important those factors are, focusing on the young people, making them competent, productive citizens. And then it comes to us. It comes to role models. Every child looks to someone. Every child wants to be someone. I wanted to be my German teacher, so I became a German teacher because I loved him and he cared for me, and I wanted to be my granddad. Those two people influenced me. When I talk to Imogen, she also talks about her teachers. When I talk to others, they talk about their uncles, they talk about their neighbors, they talk about the people they play sports with. And sometimes what we don't realize is how important as adults we are and how serious we need to take the responsibility of being role models. When my eldest daughter, Anna, was 4 years old, in her first 4 years of life, I was everything. Daddy, 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 daddy. Daddy this, daddy that. And then she went to little school and she came back. And all of a sudden she said, Mrs. Poole, Mrs. Poole, Mrs. Poole. And I'm going, who is this Mrs. Poole? Slightly jealous. But she was influenced and touched by other people. We do this all the time, but we're not necessarily aware of it. How good would it be if every single one of us knocks on the school door and says, can I come and give something? Can I be one of your co-educators? Because without us, it isn't going to work. And the notion that parents, sometimes I see it in the UK, can absolve their responsibility is wrong. Parents are the most important co-educators a child has, and parents must work with schools together for the benefit of their children. I think schools should set family homework so that everybody has to learn together. Try it. It can be quite good fun, as long as it isn't mathematics or science in my case, because I run a mile. We as adults need to remember that wonderful quote from The Little Prince. All grown-ups were once children, but only few of them remember it. We're very quick to condemn young people. We need to sit down in a corner sometimes and think that we were naughty too sometimes. Yeah, that we weren't always goody-goody. And here is evidence. I'm going to show you something now that is shocking. Somebody actually thought this was a good idea. So here you have evidence that there are adults who have totally and utterly forgotten what it was like to be a child. You imagine that you say to your children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews on a weekend, shall we go to that park, but don't bring your ball, don't bring your dog, and don't bring your bicycle? I don't think so. We have to remember what it is like to be a child. Our empathy is important. Our schools need to be more than a school. Like Barcelona Football Club is more than a club because it's owned by its members. Our schools need to be owned by us, by their communities and by their children. And then we can make a difference. And in many cases, particularly primary schools, tend to be at the center of communities anyway. It's a logical thing to do. So, a few takeaways. And these are the takeaways that I would give my children. And what's good enough for for my children is good enough for you in that sense. So there they are, Tom, Imogen, and Anna. What do I want education to do for them? I want my children to be able to cope with the unexpected items in the bagging area of life. Whatever comes at them, I want them to be so confident that they're not running away, but that they say, We'll work that out. We can do this proactively. That's what good schooling brings, the confidence, the skills, the qualification. I want them to think about now. We talk a lot about the future in education, and we forget that there are millions of children in school now. It is about now. And as Gandhi said, you know, the future depends on what we do today. I want my children to be kind. I want them to recognize how important kindness is in a world that sometimes doesn't feel very kind. Kindness is important. We need to lead by example. I want my children to be optimists. One of the things I've said to all three of my children, if at all possible, avoid negative people. Because negative people will find a problem for every solution. It drags you down. Stay optimistic. And I want them to listen to stories and tell their own, because stories are so important. When I was 9 years old, I sat outside my granddad's home. It was a sunny day. He was wearing corduroy trousers, the kitchen chair was blue, and the door behind him was brown. You know, one of those memories. I can feel the sun on my face if I close my eyes. And my granddad said to me, promise me you will always do your best at school. He didn't say, promise me you'll get top grades. My granddad was a coal miner. He had very bad lungs and his hands were arthritic. So being 9, you're programmed to say why. So I asked him why. And his answer was, because I don't want you to get hands like mine. That is the purpose of education, and that is what we owe our children. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you, Professor. I would like now to begin with the question and answer session. We will start with the first question. Can all learning needs take place through play and experience?
Yes. Next question? No, I'll expand. It is about purpose. Yeah. So why is experience so important? Because it, in our minds and in our hearts, it explains why we do things. It gives value. So two things, two very simple, brief examples. When I was at school, I had a mathematics teacher. I can see him to this day. Meneer Jongstra, I grew up in the Netherlands. And I remember the lesson when he said, if A is 2 and B is 3, what is C? And I remember thinking, I have no idea what that man's talking about. And I have no idea why I would be interested in listening to him. It made no sense. But I grew up very close to the German and Belgian border in the days before the Euro. And every Saturday for my grandparents, I went shopping for them. So I cycled into Belgium and then I bought whatever they wanted. And then in the afternoon, I cycled into Germany, whatever they wanted. And I had to convert the guilders into German marks and into Belgian francs. That was an experience. My maths became good, not because of the algebra teacher, but because my grandparents bought me a bicycle and got the shopping to do. And it's a very simple example. But experience gives purpose and understanding. And when we have that, we are capable of learning.
What insight does your experience of establishing the Children University provide to educational systems?
That there is a link, there were many, but that there is a link between families learning, visiting our cultural heritage, and the confidence that children gain and then go into school and express that. And that link is particularly pertinent for the more disadvantaged children who normally would not get that opportunity, which is why at the time the government in the UK actually gave us money to make those things happen. But it is such an important thing. And linked to that, The graduations at universities, bearing in mind that this was predominantly for children from very disadvantaged backgrounds, the graduations at universities for those children and those parents became aspects of social mobility. Those parents had never been inside a university. Those children did not know what one was. They did then. So it helped them step up.
So when experiencing Kidzania as a parent in Abu Dhabi, I noticed how the play experience were very contextualized. There was an ADNOC petrol station, there was a Majid magazine studio. Does context and culture matter in play?
Totally. I have a very interesting example of this. So we did, when we opened in London, we did extensive research and we interviewed, I have no idea how many children, but many, many, many children. And one of the questions we asked them was, what are your favorite activities? And I was expecting a list, yeah, A, B, C, D. The answer we very surprisingly got was branded activities, i.e. sponsored activities. And I remember sitting down with a group of youngsters, about 8-year-olds, and say, I don't understand your answer. What do you mean by that? And the answer we got was, well, the aeroplane in London is British Airways. That's real. Kidzania Airways is not real. The newspaper in London is The Times. That's real. Kidzania newspaper is not real. So the conclusion I reached was that our children are far cleverer than we give them credit for. So the reality factor is absolutely key.
What is your advice to educators who need to balance children outcomes with providing opportunities for experience and play-based learning?
My advice is don't balance. I don't know why you would have to balance. They are integrated. They're part and parcel of the same thing. It's like the link between being taught in school and learning outside school. It's a connect. It's connect, extend, challenge. When I worked at Kidzania, I got so bored of this question, ladies and gentlemen, that I was asked on a daily basis, Kidzania, is it fun or is it education? And my answer always was, why can't it be both at the same time? What's the matter with you people? Why are you asking that question? And I think that's the answer, isn't it? So experiential learning is not something that we do on Friday afternoon or Monday morning. It's there all the time. And teach us 2 bits of advice. One is, if you're teaching children abstract concepts, the next 2 words need to be for example. Because what you then do through the story, you make learning visible. The minute you make learning visible, you're there. I think that's the key example.
Thank you again, Professor, for your insightful participation. Play is critical in early learning, and as students progress through primary, secondary, and beyond, creativity and trust often declines, affecting transition into university and the workforce. We should collectively remember to preserve creativity within our systems and let learners' curiosity and the 1,000 questions children ask continue into adulthood. في الختام، تناولت محاضرة اليوم أهمية التعلم باللعب والتعلم من خلال التجربة في إثراء العملية التعليمية للطفل، وأهمية معرفة أطفالنا كي نقدم لهم منهج دراسي أنسب. نشكر البروفيسور على إثرائنا بالمعلومات القيمة وحضوركم الكريم على حسن استماعكم. والآن أود أن أدعو سيدي سمو الشيخ حامد بن زايد آل نهيان والمشاركين في الفيديو التقديمي للصعود على المنصة لأخذ صورة جماعية. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.